Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and it's that time again. We have a new set on the horizon. Eldritch Moon will be here in 1 week. We will be doing our midnight pre-releases and our Saturday and our Sunday pre-releases and getting ready for the set to come out. So it's time for the white set review for Eldritch Moon. Now before we get started, there of course are 3 big disclaimers on my set review. Number 1, and arguably the most important, this is a limited set review. I will be discussing all of these cards from a draft and sealed perspective. Predominantly draft, but generally the draft advice does follow through to sealed. I'll talk about where there might be a difference on a card-by-card basis. But this is limited only. I do not talk about standard or modern or legacy or EDH or etc. I may briefly mention them, but the grades, the discussions are not associated with that. Number 2, I have not played with this format yet. Obviously, I have played with Shadows of Innistrad. I've played a lot of Shadows over Innistrad Limited, but I have not played any of these cards. I have not proxied them out or tested them or anything like that. So this is just sort of my first impressions based on looking at the cards. Now, of course, I believe later today or possibly tomorrow, the pre-release will be happening over on Loading Ready Run's channel. So we'll get to see a brief preview of what the format's going to play out like. But these are my first impressions of the cards. They will probably change over time. I may be completely right on some, I may be completely wrong on others, but that will be, of course, another video later on. Disclaimer number 3, this is just my opinion on these cards. My personal preferences will come into play here and there. Certain cards that may be, a half a grade higher for you might be a half a grade lower for me, but these are just my opinions. The thing that I really like about set reviews are that they spur discussions. Discussions happen around the set reviews. No set review should ever be considered to be the truth. Nobody should ever look at a set review and say, aha, John from the Mana Leek or LSV or somebody said this is a D, therefore it is a D guaranteed. No discussion. That is not how you should approach set reviews. You should approach them as a discussion. So definitely let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you disagree with the card rating, if you agree with the card rating, if you disagree with somebody else's rating down there in the comments below, talk with them. Talk about the set reviews. But we're going to jump into the first card now. Up first, we have Blessed Alliance. Blessed Alliance is a 1 and a white instant at uncommon. It says Escalate 2. Escalate is a new mechanic in Eldritch Moon. Escalate says pay this cost for each mode chosen beyond the first. So we can pay 1 and a white plus 2 for each extra mode that we want. The rest of the card says choose 1 or more. Target player gains 4 life. Untap up to 2 target creatures. Or target opponent sacrifices an attacking creature. So we can pay 1 and a white for any of those choices, or we could pay 1 and a white plus 2, also known as 3 and a white, to do 2 of those choices, or if we want the entire card, we can pay 1 and a white plus 2, also known as 5 and a white. So, if we step through each of those, 1 and a white to gain 4 life is not worth a card. 1 and a white to untap up to 2 target creatures is not really worth a card. And target opponent sacks an attacking creature is 100% worth a card, although it is slightly narrow because, of course, they do have to be attacking you. But still, I think that means that the third mode is kind of the default mode, and I think that's what a lot of these Escalate spells are going to have. They're going to have a mode that you're usually pretty okay casting just the normal cost for. And then if you have the extra mana, the other choices tend to become a little bit better. They're just kind of gravy on top of it. So 3 and a white to gain some life and sack a creature, that's fine. We played Silver Strike as basically the same casting cost, and we had 1 less extra life off of that. So that's already a card that we know, and it's already fine. 3 and a white to untap 2 target creatures and kill an attacking, or not kill, sorry, sacrifice. That's kind of the downside of it. But sacrifice an attacking creature is, that's fine as well. It can definitely set up some cool combat surprises for your opponent. So I think this card is totally fine to play. I think it's decent enough. You're only going to cut it here and there where you have better removal, more targeted removal, rather than these sort of edict effects or attacking edict effects, which are even a little bit more narrow. So I think it's an okay card. I think you will cut it here and there, but I think, if you're even slightly lacking in removal, you'll be pretty happy playing this. So I think it's kind of a middle-of-the-road C. I think it's one of those cut it if you want, don't cut it if you don't want to kind of cards. That 4 life, don't go out of your way to try to gain it, but if you have the extra mana kicking around, why not? Really, this is all about the sacrifice and attacking creature, but I'm going to go with middle-of-the-road C. Up next, we have Borrowed Grace. Borrowed Grace is 2 and a white for an instant at common. It has Escalate 1 and a white. Choose one or both. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn, and if you pay Escalate, creatures you control get +0/+2 until end of turn. So you can increase your team by 2 power or 2 toughness, or both if you want to pay a ridiculous amount of mana, 3 white. So this is basically Trumpet Blast, which of course is a famous red card for 2 and a red that does +2/+0 to all of your team. And it's pretty darn good if you're super duper aggressive. If you're swinging in with 6 creatures and each of them get +2/+0, you're doing some serious damage to your opponent. Yeah, some might die, but you're going to get a whole lot of damage through. And that's exactly what this card wants to do and where this card wants to be played. It wants to be played in a very aggressive white, probably red deck. Could also fit into a white-green humans deck, things like that. Anything where you are going wide and attacking a whole lot. I don't see the +0/+2 side being used too much. Adding some defense is a really defensive kind of reactive move to do, and that's not something you really want to be doing. I also don't really see this being played for 3 white all that often to give your team +2/+2. That doesn't quite seem worth it either. I think you do want to play this at least the first copy in probably most aggressive decks as long as you're going pretty wide. If you're not in that deck, I think you do want to cut it. So make sure that you do know where to play this and where not to play it. I think we're going to go with kind of a middle-of-the-road C for it. Obviously, it goes up in the right deck, goes down in the other. But Borrowed Grace is a C. Up next, we have Bruna, the Fading Light. Bruna's back, and she's mono-white this time. She's 5 white for a legendary creature angel horror. Things are going bad for her. She's a rare. She's a 5/7. She has flying. She has vigilance. And she says, when you cast Bruna, the Fading Light, you may return target angel or human creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Pretty solid. There's also something else down there in brackets that says melds with Gisela the Broken Blade. You all probably are well aware of what meld is, but we'll talk about meld when we get to the second card that has to do with this meld stuff. For now, we're just going to talk about Bruna herself. And unfortunately, Bruna herself is a little bit expensive. She's a 7-drop, and, that's kind of pricey. It's not quite Angel of Deliverance 8 mana pricey, but it is still a decent price to pay, and not every deck is going to be able to cast this. A flying 5/7 with Vigilance is nothing to cough at. It's pretty darn solid, and hopefully getting back a human, getting back an angel seems far less likely and a little bit more, magical Christmas landy. But it does, of course, help you get back Gisela if she's already died somehow. But it's a solid effect. This definitely doesn't go in an aggressive deck. Red-white probably isn't going to want to play this. Red-white's going to want to cap out at like 5 mana, not 7. This probably goes more in like a black-white kind of deck, something that maybe is a little bit more mid-rangey and can more reliably get to 7. I don't think it's super first pickable just because of the cost of it. But I think it is playable in a good number of white decks. Just be careful. Just make sure that you know what deck you're in and that you know that you're going to be able to reliably cast it. I'm not super high on Bruna. I think she is fine, but that 7 mana does give me pause. So I'm going to go with a B on her. I think there are going to be some cases where you are going to pass her. Maybe even if you're in white, if you're already going very aggressive, you'll probably want to pass her. And I would not consider jumping into white just because you see her at the start of pack 2 if you're not at all in white yet. So I'm going to go, pretty solid B, not quite first pickable just because of the price. Up next, we have Choking Restraints. Choking Restraints is 2 and a white for an enchantment aura at common. It says enchant creature. Enchanted creature can't attack or block, which of course is pacifism. But it costs 1 more because there's a little bit more stuff to this. Pay 3 white and sacrifice Choking Restraints. exile enchanted creature. So yeah, this is slightly expensive pacifism, which is still pretty darn playable. Pacifism is almost always first pickable in most formats that it's in, and is just a really, really good piece of removal. Tacking on an extra mana, I will still pay that, because making a creature unable to do much of anything is very, very, very solid. Now, the second part of this is a little bit strange. Pay 3 white to exile it. Why would you exile it if you already have it pacified? Well, this is probably going to be used most commonly in a situation where the opponent is going to maybe bounce it to get rid of the restraints or kill the restraints somehow. Maybe you could use this as a 2-step super expensive removal to take down something that has a really good activated ability, because of course this is not a rest, this is pacifism. But ultimately I don't think that second clause is going to be used too much. Don't leave mana open for it. Don't try to be super sneaky with it. It's usually not going to be too worth it. Usually you're just going to treat this as a pacifism that costs 1 more, and that is still totally playable, very highly pickable, and in weaker packs may even be first pickable if your bomb is bad and your rare is not a bomb and your uncommons are not that great. So yeah, Choking Restraint seems pretty solid to me. I'm going to give it a solid B. Up next, we have Collective Effort. Collective Effort is 1 white for a sorcery at rare. It has Escalate, tap an untapped creature you control. So you don't actually pay mana for this Escalate one, you just tap a creature that's untapped. Choose 1 or more. Destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Destroy target enchantment. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. This is huge. This seems really, really, really good to me. I don't much care for Smite the Monstrous, which is the first option, but when it only costs 3 mana, it definitely gets better despite moving to sorcery speed. The real star of the show here, though, is plunking down a counter on every single creature you control. Anthem effects are amazingly good, like Always Watching, and while this isn't exactly an anthem because it's not a static effect, it just happens once, it is going to basically function as an anthem. This is also one of the cheapest Escalate costs out there. Not costing any mana whatsoever and just requiring you to tap a creature is not too bad, especially in exchange for getting, a Smite the Monstrous tacked on, or maybe a Naturalize tacked on to your awesome Anthem effect. Yeah, this just seems really, really good, and it seems first pickable to me. I think I would always play this and always be very happy to see it opened. I can't quite give it, a solid A or an A+. It's not exactly bomb status. It's, it's more Always Watching status, but I am going to go with A- on it. I think it is solidly first pickable, and I think it will do a lot of work for you. So Collective Effort, A-. Up next, we have Courageous Outrider. Courageous Outrider is 3 and a white for a creature human scouted uncommon. It's a 3/4, and it says when Courageous Outrider enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a human card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. 4 mana for a 3/4 is fine. Vestige of Emrakul was always weakly playable in Battle for Zendikar, and Outrider should be as well. But if you're in green-white humans, or even if you have like a solid 7 or so humans, then this goes up even higher. And it's probably not hard to have that many humans if you're in white X. White green, white blue, white red, white black. White anything should have a decent number of creatures unless you're going heavy into spirits in white blue. Odds are this is going to be a pretty decent pickup to start with that gets better in a pack 2 when you kind of know you're headed towards the heavy human deck. I don't think it's probably ever quite first pickable. It's definitely not a Duskwatch recruiter, despite the somewhat similarity to it. But it is still pretty solid. I'm going to go with a B- on it. That might be slightly too generous. Maybe it's more of a C+, but it's definitely in that range. So Courageous Outrider, B-. Up next, we have Dawn-Griff. Dawn-Griff is 2 and a white for a creature Hippogriff. It's a common, it's a 2/2, and it flies. And that's about all we've got going on with Dawn-Griff. And, this is about as vanilla as a 2/2 flyer is ever going to get, and it's about the right cost for a 2/2 flyer. I'm not going to be upset if I play these in my deck. I'm also not going to super actively search them out. I think they're a decent kind of mid-pack pick. 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer is pretty decent, and if your opponent doesn't have a reacher or flyer of their own, it will get in for a fair bit of damage. So I think you will kind of always include these, at least the first one, maybe even the second, or maybe the third one. I think they're fine. They're just not a high pick. These are what you're going to be taking kind of like 6th, through 9th pick, I think. So they're kind of like a stereotypical C+. You're generally going to play them. You're not going to cut them, but you're just not going to super actively search them out. So C+ for Don Griff. Next up, we have Deploy the Gatewatch. Deploy the Gatewatch. That sounds pretty similar to Call the Gatewatch. Is it just as bad? Let's find out. 4 white for a mythic. It's a sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put up to 2 planeswalker cards from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Yeah, it's just about as bad as Call the Gatewatch, except this time, instead of feeling sad about opening a totally terrible garbage rare for your draft or sealed deck, you're going to feel even worse because you wasted a mythic on it. Yeah, this is just bad. This is absolutely, totally, and utterly unplayable in sealed and in draft. I don't care if you have a planeswalker, you do not play this card, because if you draw that planeswalker before you draw this card, it's a dead card. This is an absolute 100% F-. This should be a last pick. Unless, of course, you want this for your deck at home, in which case, take it when it wheels, but don't play this. Please don't play this. I don't care if you open a planeswalker. Don't play this. It is a hard F-. Luckily, everybody should know that from their experience with Call of the Gatewatch. But yeah, this is bad, and I'm going to open so many of them. But yeah, hard F-. Up next, we have Desperate Sentry. Desperate Sentry is 2 and a white for a creature human soldier at common. He's a 1/2, and he says, when Desperate Sentry dies, put a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi Horror creature token onto the battlefield. He also has Delirium. Desperate Sentry gets +3/+0 as long as you have Delirium. Delirium, of course, being 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. A 1/2 that drops out a 3/2 when it dies seems fine enough for me at 3 mana. I think the best part of this is that it looks like an amazing Emerge creature. We'll talk about Emerge a little bit later, but it's a new mechanic in Eldritch Moon. This on 3 can allow you to drop into an Emerge 7 creature on turn 4, along with a 3/2 Eldrazi Horror just to boot. The Delirium is nice, and this turns into a normally costed creature with a great upside once you get Delirium, but that's a little bit later into the game. There are some pretty cool sacrifice outlets as well that we'll talk about in this review, just in a few cards that this also plays well with. I think the first of these will be pretty playable a non-zero amount of the time. It's definitely no Thraben Inspector, but it is still decent. I'm going to start a little bit high on this. I'm going to start at a C+. It'll remain to see if the 3 mana is too much or not, but I don't think it is. I'm going to start on C+, and keep a close eye on this. Drogskull Shieldmate is up next. It's another 3-drop, 2 and a white creature spirit soldier at uncommon for a 2/3. It has flash, and it says when Drogskull Shieldmate enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +0/+1 until end of turn. So this is a pretty normally costed 2/3 with flash and the ability to hopefully save your creatures during combat, which seems pretty okay. Honestly, I'm a little surprised they didn't push this to 4, because at 3 it seems totally playable to me. Note that it doesn't become a 2/4 because it does say other creatures, but still, I think I'd be pretty happy with the first one of these. I wouldn't consider it a high pick, more kind of mid-packish, but still totally fine. You know, it's a spirit, which is a relevant creature type, of course, and it's just going to be a decent combat trick that sticks around as a creature itself. Not bomby, not amazing, not a high pick, but still totally fine, and I'm going to go with a C+ on it. Up next, we have a double face card. Double face cards are back, of course. We have Extricator of Sin, 2 and a white for a creature human cleric at uncommon. It's a 0/3. It says when Extricator of Sin enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another permanent. If you do, put a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi Horror creature token onto the battlefield. It has Delirium, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, transform Extricator of Sin. It turns into Extricator of Flesh, a creature Eldrazi Horror of its own. It says Eldrazi you control have vigilance. You can also pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice a non-Eldrazi creature to put a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi Horror creature token onto the battlefield, and it's a 3/5. Kind of a pain that Desperate Sentry is a 3-drop just like this, because you can't exactly curve into Desperate Sentry into this to get yourself 2 3/2s, but still playing this on turn 4 for 3 mana and getting yourself a pair of 3/2s seems pretty darn solid to me. Later in the game, making sure that your Eldrazi you have on hand are vigilant, as well as providing a way to sack further sentries or other things with leave the battlefield triggers, makes this seem like a pretty darn good card. I think I like this card a fair bit if you have the synergy. If you're lacking the synergy of things that you can just sack all willy-nilly to turn them into 3/2s, then it probably goes down a little bit. But still, you can turn all of your 2/2s for 2 and all of your 1-drops that you probably shouldn't be playing anyways into 3/2 horrors. Turning my Thraben Inspector into a 3/2 horror seems pretty good to me. Just a ton of use that this can do. I think this should be a relatively high pick and then go for the synergy from there. I'm going to start at a B- on this. I feel like it could even be a little bit better than that, but let's start at B-. Up next, we have Faith Unbroken. Faith Unbroken is 3 and a white for an enchantment aura at uncommon. Enchant creature you control. When Faith Unbroken enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until Faith Unbroken leaves the battlefield. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2. So this is interesting. It's kind of like build your own Fiend Hunter or build your own Banisher Priest as a more recent example. I'm going to have to see how this plays to really get a good grasp on it, but I'm assuming that it's worse than Oblivion Ring, it's worse than Banisher Priest. I think it's just worse than all the cards that it's trying to be. Removal will just blow you out, because for one removal spell, they get to kill your creature, they get to kill your Faith Unbroken, and they get their creature back. They get to like 3 for 1 you almost. That feels bad. That feels really bad to me. And the removal in this set is looking relatively decent. We have Murder back. Murder's not Doomblade, but it's close. I think it's definitely worse than those cards that it's trying to be. And so I don't think that this is going to be in the premium removal level. I think this is going to be much less playable than that. I'm going to start at C. I think if you're lacking removal, you shouldn't feel too bad about including this, but I think you shouldn't include this if you do have better things, if you do have your angelic purges and stuff like that. So we'll start with a C and see how it plays out. It could be really good, but I really doubt it. Next up, we have Faithbearer Paladin. Faithbearer Paladin is 4 and a white for a creature human knight at common. It's a 3/4 and it's got lifelink, and that's about all that's going on with it. 3/4 for 5 isn't the best stats, but lifelink is nice enough. It compares pretty miserably, though, to previous 3/4 lifelinkers like Archangel of Thune and Kalitas. I think ultimately you'll play this as kind of a 23rd card, but don't be afraid to cut this pretty liberally. 5 mana is a lot to ask for this card, and while it can have some impact, it's not that great. So I'm going to start at C-, kind of a 23rd card level. Next up, we have Fiendbinder. Fiendbinder is 3 and a white for a creature human soldier at common. It's a 3/2, and whenever Fiendbinder attacks, tap target creature defending player controls. I like this a fair bit. It's a 3/2 for 4 that takes out your opponent's best blocker when it attacks, and that seems pretty solid. Seems like a good kind of top end for an aggressive deck where 4 is kind of, the upper echelon of mana cost that you'll be playing, because it'll help you just continue swinging in. It will do probably a decent enough imitation of Voldaren Duelist. It doesn't have haste, obviously, but it's going to do kind of the same thing that card did, and it was a pretty solid common in Shadows over Innistrad. So I think you should probably relatively highly pick this once you know you're headed down that route. Don't be afraid to cut this if you are in a more mid-rangey deck, if you're not going to be attacking all the time, but don't underestimate this power if you are an aggressive deck. I like it a fair bit. I'm going to start out potentially too high on it, but I'm going to start at a B- for Fiendbinder. Up next is Geist of the Lonely Vigil. Geist of the Lonely Vigil is 1 and a white for a creature spirit cleric at uncommon. It's a 2/3. It has Defender, it has Flying, and it has Delirium. It can attack as though it did not have a Defender, as long as you have Delirium. 2/3 Defender for 2 that can attack a fair bit later in the game doesn't seem the best to me. Seems like a decent sideboard card if you need an early blocker and maybe main deck it if you're trying to reach the late game anyways, if you are kind of mid-rangey or looking to hold off to cast your Bruna or something like that. Doesn't seem like the best of picks to me, though, and I'll likely look to pick it up kind of late and probably keep it in the sideboard most of the time. So I'm going to go with kind of a D+ on it. I think it is more of a sideboard card than it is a main deckable card. There will be some places where it can be main deckable if you have a consistent way of hitting Delirium, if you're in the Spirit deck maybe, or if you are kind of that mid-rangey, but I'm going to start out at D+. Up next, we have Gisela, the Broken Blade. Gisela's back as well. She's mono-white as well. She's also not having a good time either. She's 2 white. She's a mythic, unlike Bruna. She's a legendary creature angel horror. She's a 4/3. She has flying. She has first strike. She has lifelink. And at the beginning of your end step, if you both own and control Gisela the Broken Blade and a creature named Bruna the Fading Light, exile them, then meld them into Brizella, Voice of Nightmares. We'll talk about Brizella in just a few minutes, but up first we just have the Gisela card. Just this card. If you just have this card by itself, how good is it? It's ridiculous. It's a 4-mana 4/3 flying first strike lifelinker. That's a lot of amazingly good keywords on a very well-costed card that has a decently high power and toughness for what she is. This is a snap windmill slam first pick. This is just, this is ridiculous. Gisela is incredibly good. She's flat out just a solid A+, just on her side. There is no way you should ever pass her. Absolute A+. But we can't just talk about Gisela and Bruna by themselves, although we should. I'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about meld. There are 3 pairs of cards in this set that meld with each other. And what happens there is if you have them both on the battlefield and the trigger resolves, I think it's usually at the end step, then you exile both the cards, and they immediately come back, transformed. They have a backside, but their backsides are 2 halves of a card, just like BFM from Unglued, and they go together to make a gigantic card. So they go together and they make Brizella. Brizella, Voice of Nightmares, is a legendary creature Eldrazi Angel. It's a mythic, of course, because the one front side was a mythic. It is a 9/10 flying first strike vigilance lifelink, and your opponents can't cast spells with converted mana cost 3 or less. So it gets all the good parts of Gisela plus tax on vigilance, because why not? It's a 9/10, so things are just going to get way out of hand. And just as a random upside, your opponent can't cast little creatures and pump spells and little 3 mana or less spells like that. Absolutely crazy. If you ever get Brizella on the table, you should win that game basically immediately. But the big giant but here, I have to dream crush everybody. You're never going to do this. You are never ever going to do this in sealed or draft. Yes, that's a hyperbolic never, because 1 or 2 people listening to this of the tens of thousands that listen to this might actually pull this off. You may be that lucky that you get these 2 uber specific cards that you need to pull this off. Everybody else out there, you're never going to get into a draft where you actually successfully draft both of these, or a sealed tournament where you successfully open both of these. One of the big reasons you'll never do this in draft is because Bruna and Gisela are both totally and utterly, well, Gisela more than Bruna, but both of them are super great picks for a white deck. You don't need the other half to play the one half, and so it's even less likely that it's going to come around to you. So, don't get too excited about Brizella. Yes, Brizella is amazing. Yes, it should basically instantly win the game for you, but you're not going to see it. So, A+ for Gisela. Technically A+ for Brizella, but it's just not going to happen very often. Sorry, guys. Hate to be the Dream Crusher, but we'll see if maybe the other melt cards are more likely a little bit later in the review. But Gisela, A+. Up next, we have Give No Ground. Give No Ground is 3 and a white for an instant at uncommon. Target creature gets +2/+6 until end of turn and can block any number of creatures this turn. This feels a little bit too close to a fog to me. Yes, you might get to kill a creature, or maybe 2, but it's still fairly foggy and pricey at that at 4 mana. I don't think I'll really be looking to play these even out of the sideboard. It just feels way too defensive and reactive to me, and that's not where you want to be with a high pick main deckable card. Out of the sideboard, if you're getting beat down and you need something similar to a fog, then sure. But outside of that situation, I don't think you really want to be playing this too much, so I'm going to give it a sideboard D. Guardian of Pilgrims is up next. It's a 1 and a white creature spirit cleric at common. It's a 2/2. When Guardian of Pilgrims enters the battlefield, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. This is just a bear with an upside, which is 100% playable. 2/2s for 2 are always playable. You'll usually play any of them that you have, and you'll take them relatively kind of mid-packish. This one is even better in that one of your creatures is going to be a little bit bigger for the turn that it comes down, which means that not only is this good on turn 2 because it's a 2/2, it's good on turn 4 or turn 5 to get an extra point of damage through with a flyer or whatever you happen to have. So yeah, take this mid-pack, be happy, play every copy, C+. Up next is Ironclad Slayer. Ironclad Slayer is 2 and a white for a creature human warrior at common. It's a 3/2, and it says when Ironclad Slayer enters the battlefield, you may return target aura or equipment card from your graveyard to your hand. Meh, this feels like a 23rd filler card to me. That rules text there is going to be flavor text the vast majority of the time. Equipment doesn't really end up in the graveyard too often. Your auras end up in the graveyard here or there, but you probably shouldn't be playing many of the auras that end up in the graveyard reliably, so why bother getting them back? Things like, +2/+2 until end of turn, Divine Favor, and stuff like that. Maybe you can get something good like Choking Restraints back or something like that, but realistically, this is going to be just a 3/2 for 3 most of the time. So cut it liberally. Play it if you absolutely need another creature, and this is kind of all you have, but otherwise, C-. Up next is Iron Rites Cleansing. Iron Rites Cleansing is 2 and a white for a sorcery at common. Exile target artifact or enchantment. Not much to say here. It's a pure sideboard card. Don't ever main deck this. There is not enough enchantment or artifacts out there that are solid enough and main deckable enough that you'll reliably see them. Play this only if you find yourself up against somebody who has unbeatable artifacts or enchantments. If you see one Bound by Moonsilver, it's still not really worth siding this in. You would want to see a couple of those before you even think about putting this in. It is a sideboard D if I've ever seen one. Up next, we have Lone Rider. Lone Rider is 1 and a white for a creature human knighted uncommon. It's a 1/1. It has first strike, it has lifelink, and at the beginning of your end step, if you gained 3 or more life this turn, transform Lone Rider. You flip Lone Rider over, and it becomes It That Rides as One. It That Rides as One is a creature Eldrazi Horror at uncommon. It's a 4/4. It has first strike, trample, and lifelink. I'm a little bit cautious on this guy. His front side is not that great. It's a 1/1 for 2 with first strike and lifelink. Out of the sideboard, maybe, if you see a lot of X1s on your opponent's side, but I'd be a little bit wary about main decking this simply from the front side. The back side is super solid, but gaining 3 life in 1 turn is going to require some work. Notably, it's going to require another card. You might need to have a Nearheath Chaplain, you might have to have a combat trick or some sort of aura, but it's really going to be a 2-card combo to pull this off, and that's always asking a fair bit in Limited to get a 2-card combo to work. Ultimately, I feel like this probably won't flip reliably enough to be awesome. So I'm going to start out a little bit cautiously at a C, maybe a C+, but I just don't know if I want to main deck a 1/1 for 2. First strike and lifelink are awesome, but I don't think I want to main deck it. I'll keep it as a C, though. If you can flip it, it's just fantastic, but I'll keep an eye on it. But we'll start out with a C. Following up Lone Rider, we've got Long Road Home. Long Road Home is 1 and a white for an instant at uncommon. Exile target creature. At the beginning of the next end step, return that creature to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. This is kind of similar to the white combat trick spells that we've seen recently, like Feat of Resistance, God's Willing, but it's not quite there. It's not quite as awesome as those. I still love this card. I think it is relatively solid, but the fact that using it as a combat trick pulls your creature out of combat and so doesn't kill their creature, which God's Willing and Feat of Resistance and whatnot usually would allow, kind of hurts this a little bit. But, you still get to save your creature from kill spells. You can still abuse enter the battlefield effects with this at the same time as pumping your creature up with a counter permanently, and that seems pretty fantastic. I'd still prefer a Feat of Resistance over this, I think, but only barely. This probably isn't first pickable, but you still probably want to take this moderately highly, and even higher if you already have some pretty good ETB effects. So keep an eye on Long Road Home. I think it's going to be pretty solid. And so I'm actually going to be a little bit generous and start out with a B- on it. I think it is that solid. Up next is Lune Ark Mantle. Lune Ark Mantle is 1 and a white for an enchantment aura at common. It says enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has pay 1 generic mana, sacrifice a permanent. This creature gains flying until end of turn. This makes a decent sack outlet, but spending a card to turn something into a sack outlet isn't really the best of plans. I'll be beaten by this card for sure, but that still doesn't mean that you should play it. Like most auras, this just seems way too shaky and way too setting yourself up for a 2-for-1 with way too low of an upside to be playable for me. I'm going to say cut it liberally. Don't play it terribly often, if really at all. I'm going to start at a C-. Personally, I think it probably should even be a little bit lower, but I'm going to be beaten by it for sure. Up next, we have Peace of Mind. Peace of Mind is a reprint, actually. It's 1 and a white for an enchantment at uncommon, and it says, pay a white, discard a card, you gain 3 life. And that's it. Now, I've not actually played with Peace of Mind before in its previous sets. I believe they were relatively old. I want to say kind of back near Tempest or somewhere around there. So if I'm wildly off, because it is amazing, I'm just unaware of it, but I don't think it's all that good. It's similar to Stern Constable in that this is a madness enabler in a color with no madness, which significantly hurts its usability because if you're playing a 2-color deck, which you should be, half of your cards or so are going to be white and not actually madness cards. Sure, it can help enable Delirium, but just flat out discarding a card for 3 life is not really the way you want to enable Delirium. You want to enable it by casting cards, casting instants and sorceries, having creatures die in combat and trade. At least Stern Constable was a creature and had a very relevant ability. This gets you 3 life, which, I don't know, it just doesn't seem what I want. I don't think this is very good. I feel like you should pass this pretty reliably. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but I don't really think so. I am out on Peace of Mind, and I've got to go with a D- on this one. Maybe, just maybe, you could bring it in out of the board if you really need some life gain, but that does not seem like a good plan, so D-. Next up, we have Providence. Providence is a sorcery. It's 5 white, and it's rare. It says you may reveal this card from your opening hand. If you do this at the beginning of your first upkeep, your life total becomes 26. And then it says your life total becomes 26. So basically, if you have this in your opening hand, you can say, hey, look, and your life total becomes 26. And then at a future turn, when you have 5 white, which is a heck of a lot of mana, you can reset your life total to 26 one more time. So you can gain 6 life right from the start of the game, and then sometime later in the game, you can gain some amount of life, or lose life if you're above 26, if you decided to cast this for some weird reason. Yeah, I don't like this card. I think this card is bad, and I think it's going to catch new players like crazy. I think new players are going to say, hey, more life is always good, and hey, those games where I'm at 1 life and I cast this and I gain 25 life is going to be amazing. But realistically, this card is trash. It's just garbage. It's so expensive. Getting 6 life extra at the start of the game is not going to help you. The only place it will help you is if you are in a racing matchup, and you can gain that 6 life by playing like a 2-drop blocker that can maybe survive a couple of turns and soak up a little bit of damage. That's all you need. You don't need to play this giant casting cost, basically do nothing spell. This is really kind of another of the good questions of how much life gain do I need, costed at what, to actually play a card that does nothing but gain me life. And 7 mana to gain me potentially 25 life is still not enough. If it was 1 mana, maybe. But 7 mana, no. I am totally out on Providence. I think this card should be one of the last picks in the pack. Do not take this. Do not play it. I've got to go with a solid F on it. Next up, we have Repel the Abominable. Repel the Abominable is 1 and a white for an instant at uncommon. Prevent all damage that would be dealt this turn by non-human sources. So hey, look, we have another similar to a fog kind of card. This is a better fog than Give No Ground wants to be, I think, so long as you build around it. In a Pack to the Brim green-white humans deck with a ton of humans, this could be an absolute blowout. But, like many fogs, this is primarily a reactive, defensive card, and if you're planning on being defensive in a human deck of all decks, you're in for a bad time. You don't really want to be planning for this. As a result, I ultimately think this is more of a sideboard card when you find out that you're not the beatdown, so it's going to be a D+ for me. I think it's a good sideboard. I think it is one of the good fogs that are out there, or at least one of the decent fogs that are out there. But I still don't think it's main deckable, but I think it is eminently sideboardable if you do find that you're not the beatdown. So D+ on Repel the Abominable. Up next, we have Sanctifier of Souls. Sanctifier of Souls is 3 and a white. It's a creature human cleric at rare. It's a 2/3, and it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Sanctifier of Souls gets +1/+1 until end of turn. But wait, there's more! Pay 2 and a white and exile a creature card from your graveyard. Put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So yeah, it's a 2/3 for 4, which is a little bit overcosted, but every single time a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it becomes a 3/4, which is pretty okayly costed, pretty averagely costed, I would suppose. And it gives basically all of your creatures in the graveyard the Dauntless Cathar ability, which is not anything to feel too bad about. Seems like a fairly solid, fairly fine card. It'll pretty routinely be a 3/4 on your turn, assuming you're playing creatures each turn, which ideally you usually are in a game of limited magic. And now and then you can actually take your opponent by surprise by making it a 3/4 on their turn. One important thing to note is that this isn't exactly the Dauntless Cathar ability, because you can do the creature or the spirit at instant speed. It doesn't have the sorcery clause like Nearheath Chaplain and Dauntless Cathar have. So you can pump those spirits out as chump blockers. You can make your Sanctifier of Souls a surprise 3/4 to make it even a better blocker. Yeah, this just seems to have so much utility. I don't think it's amazing. I don't think this is a bomb that's going to win you the game or anything. I think this is much more in the sort of really, really, really good utility kind of creature. I think every single white deck would be happy playing it. Everything from aggro to mid-range to some sort of white control deck would be happy with this. It's just not a high first pick. It's like a solid B+. You're probably not going to take the awesome removal over this, but you're going to take it over basically everything else. So B+, always play it. Sanctifier of Souls. Following up the Sanctifier of Souls, we have a spirit. We have a Selfless Spirit. Selfless Spirit is a 1 and a white creature spirit cleric. It's a rare. It's a 2/1. It's got flying, and it says sacrifice Selfless Spirit. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. It's a 2/1 flyer for 2. That is fantastic. That is so amazingly costed. Very aggressive creature. That's going to be right at home in any deck that wants to be coming out of the gate swinging. 2/1 for 2 is about as cheap as you can expect a flyer for. This isn't a game winner. It's not splashy. It's not insane, but it will get in for an awful lot of damage. I think this is a solid first pick unless there's a bigger bomb, probably in the foil or the flip card slot, or some sort of really good removal in the deck. But otherwise, I think it is a solid first pick, and definitely a high pick, and always an include in really all but the most controlling of decks. And even there, I think they'd be a little bit okay hedging their bet with this getting in a whole bunch of damage. Obviously, 1 toughness is a bit of a problem. Any other flyers will block it. Dual shot will kill it, things like that. But, you know, they have to have those answers, or else they're just going to get hit for 2, and then 4, and then 6, and then 8, and then be dead after a while. So yeah, I think this is kind of a middle-of-the-road B. It's not flashy enough to be too much higher. The ability is just kind of gravy. I didn't talk too much about it. Yeah, you can sack it to give all your creatures indestructible. Maybe it saves a bomb here or there or something, but it's on the table. Your opponent knows about it, so don't expect to get any crazy blowouts with it or anything. But yeah, I think it's totally fine. Solid middle-of-the-road B. I'm pretty happy to see this. Next up is Cigar Does Aid. Cigar Does Aid is a single white mana for an enchantment at rare. It says you may cast aura and equipment spells as though they had flash. Whenever an equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach it to target creature you control. So all of your auras have flash, as do your equipment, and your equipment gets to equip for free. Not too bad, but while it is nice and cheap at a single white mana, it still does, of course, cost you a card, and I just don't think that there's a place for this in Limited. There's not enough great auras and equipment that would justify me spending a card on this. I think it's going to be, you know, pretty playable in a whole bunch of EDH decks and casual decks, and people are going to love this in the formats where you can really build crazy things with it, but I don't think Limited is really the place for this. I think it should be a pretty low pick unless you want it for your deck at home, I guess. But in any sort of competitive thing, I don't think you're actually going to take this or play it. So D+ for me, I guess. You know, there's some enchantment removal that would be kind of cool with this if you happen to get a bunch of it, but I'll go with a D+ on this, but I don't think it's playable at all. Next up, we have Sigardian Priest. Sigardian Priest is 1 and a white for a creature human cleric at common. It's a 1/2, and it says pay 1 generic mana and tap it to tap target non-human creature. This is Abyssinian Priest. Abyssinian Priest, for those who weren't around, is exactly this card in the original Innistrad set. It appears that, of course, Avacyn is now dead, and I guess Sigarda must have taken over now. For those who weren't around, Abyssinian Priest was incredible. It was super, super, super good, and this being the exact same card will probably be just as good. Yes, it doesn't tap humans, and there are a lot of humans in Innistrad, but there's a lot of werewolves and vampires and Eldrazi and horrors and etc. And paying one single generic mana to tap it down and tapping this creature is really, really, really good. Don't underestimate this card. It looks a little bit unassuming if you haven't had much experience with tappers, but you should take this early and play it always. This is going to be a powerhouse. Solid, solid B from me. Up next is Spectral Reserve. Spectral Reserves is 3 and a white for a sorcery at common. Put 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. You gain 2 life. This is not Lingering Souls. Costing 1 more mana and not having flashback is not an okay trade for gaining 2 life. I don't see this being terribly playable. At instant speed, sure. This would be awesome at instant speed. Watch out for people at the pre-release thinking that this has instant speed and trying to get you with it. It's a sorcery. I just don't think that this is fast enough. I think it's too slow and unimpactful. I could see it squeak in as a 23rd card, maybe. Maybe if you're in the spirit deck and you have some spirit synergy going on, maybe. But generally, I think this is kind of 23rd card area. So I'm going to go with a C- on it. Next up, we have Steadfast Cathar. Steadfast Cathar is 1 and a white for a creature human soldier at common. It's a 2/1. Whenever Steadfast Cathar attacks, it gets +0/+2 until end of turn. So it's a 2/1 that blocks as a 2/1 but attacks as a 2/3. It's okay, but it's not great. Could be okay in a super aggressive deck perhaps, but there's just so many better options out there for you that you probably will be able to pretty reliably pick up that this kind of falls to 23rd cardish area. Look for it late in the pack and cut it liberally. I'm going to go with a C- on it. All right, we've had enough of humans. Let's go to an angel. Let's go to Subjugator Angel. Subjugator Angel is 4 white for a creature angel at uncommon. It's got flying, it's a 4/3, and when Subjugator Angel enters the battlefield, tap all creatures your opponents control. 6 mana is a little bit pricey. Sarah Angel was of course amazing at 5 for a 4/4 Vigilant Angel. This loses a toughness down to 4/3, it loses vigilance, and it gains a mana cost in order to gain the ability to tap your opponent's team for 1 turn. That's probably still okay in a mid-rangey to control-y white deck with this kind of being your top end as a way for you to get through. I don't think this goes ahead of premium removal, and I don't think that this really goes in an aggro deck because 6 mana is a lot of mana for your typical aggro deck. So don't get too married to this card, and I don't think you want to first pick it outside of a really weak pack. I think it'll be fine enough, but definitely make sure that you know what deck it goes in. Don't be afraid to cut it. Don't be too married to it if you're being much more aggressive. I'm going to go with a B- on it. I think it's going to do an awful lot of work in those mid-rangey to more control-y decks. But as I said, just be aware of when to cut this because there are definitely going to be times where you should. Up next, we have Thalia, Heretic Cathar. Thalia's back just like Bruna, just like Gisela, but she's not having that bad of a time. She's not a horror. She's 2 and a white for a legendary creature human soldier at rare. She's a 3/2. She has first strike, and it says, creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Holy moly, she is back and even better than the last time as far as limited is concerned. It remains to be seen whether she'll have the same impact as her original version had in Legacy and Modern. She's slightly bigger, she's slightly more expensive, but her ability only affects opponents this time. It doesn't affect you. The non-basic land clause is basically flavor text because all of the non-basic lands that people are playing in limited generally enter tapped anyways, but having their creatures enter tapped is huge. If they're trying to be aggressive, it's going to put them, a full turn behind. If they're trying to block, they're going to be having trouble. It's just going to put your opponent in such a bad position defensively and aggressively that they're just going to have a seriously bad time. Thalia, I think, is going to be an absolute all-star in aggressive decks, likely red-white or green-white, and she should be a windmill first pick when you see her. 3/2 first strike plus that ability is just fantastic. Thalia, Heretic Cathar, absolute solid A. But Thalia is not alone. Up next we have Thalia's Lancers. Thalia's Lancers is 3 white for a creature human knight at rare. It's a 4/4, it has first strike, and when Thalia's Lancers enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a legendary card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Now, obviously, that's mostly flavor text. You're probably not going to have a legendary creature to go and, fetch up. You're going to have Thalia. Maybe you could have Bruna, maybe you're super lucky have Gisela, but in general, you're just not going to be that lucky because all the legendaries, of course, are rare or mythic. So ignore that. That's not really going to be anything that makes this super awesome. If you do have that, cool, but that's just gravy. Don't rate this card, don't pick this card based on that unless you already have that legendary. So it's a 4/4 first strike for 5, which, that's ever so slightly costly, but at 4 mana it'd be broken. So yeah, until we get half mana back from Unhinged, 5 mana is where this has to be. You'd still play this at the top end of most of your white-red, white-green kind of decks and be pretty darn happy about it. So, this isn't exactly bomb territory because it is just a 4/4 first strike. That's much more in the range of really, really good creature area rather than the holy crap, you must deal with this now or you lose kind of area. So it's not going to be anything crazy like an A, but I am going to give it a solid B-. If you do have a legendary already, you could upgrade this to a B, but I think B- is kind of where it's going to go. I don't think you first pick this over premium removal, and I think it has to be a relatively weakish pack where you do decide to first pick this, but it should be kind of like a second, third, fourth, fifth pick. So Thalia's Lancers, B-. All right, we've gotten there. We're on to the last card, Thraben's Standardbearer, a single white mana for a creature human soldier at common. It's a 1/1. You can also pay 1 and a white, tap it, and discard a card to put a 1/1 white human soldier creature token onto the battlefield. It's a 1/1 for 1, which you generally don't want to be playing anyways unless it's amazing. And like Stern Constable, I don't think discard is what white wants to be doing. There's way better ways of enabling Delirium than just throwing a card away for, in this case, a 1/1 token. There's no madness in white, really, so half your deck is not going to be really taking advantage of discarding madness cards. Paying mana on top of it, plus tapping this thing just to get a 1/1, just does not seem like what I want to be doing ever at all, on top of having to play a 1/1 for 1. I'm going to avoid this. I'm going to avoid it hard. Don't play it. I think it is just flat out bad. D- from me. Well, that's going to wrap it up for the first set review, for the first white set review. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. This is the 4th or 5th set review that I've done. If you enjoy this, definitely share it. Share it amongst your friends. Share it with your local game store. Share it on Reddit. Share it on forums. Share it wherever. Spread the word. Get people talking about the new set and what the cards are and how they are and if they're good or not. I'm pretty excited to play white. I think white looks really fun. I'm glad to see the slightly expensive pacifism. I can't wait to play with Gisela. Boy, do I hope that I open her. I would love to see somebody, it doesn't have to be me, I would love to see anybody, anywhere, actually open and play Gisela and Bruna and get themselves a fancy little Brizella. But yeah, I'm excited by white. It looks pretty decent. There's some solid stuff in there, and there's an enchantment theme that I'm not sure if it will actually take off or not. But hopefully you guys enjoyed that. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at TheManaLeek. That's Leek, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/TheManaLeek and at twitch.tv/TheManaLeek. You've found me here on YouTube. You've got that comment section down below. Please make use of it. Discuss these cards. Discuss with me. Discuss amongst yourselves. If you enjoy my videos, click that thumbs up icon. Click that subscribe button so that you know as soon as new videos come out. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow for the blue set review.